Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of Joji Obara. He was a pretty wealthy man in Japan, and he led a very dark life, which obviously we will get into and you will find out about if you do not already know about this case. I just want to say here as well, please don't take my pronunciations of the names being incorrect, which they will be, I have no doubt in my mind, as me trying to be offensive. I'm useless with them. So I mean, anybody who's watched my channel will already know that. So yeah, I just want to apologize for this in advance because this case is Japanese and I probably can't say any of them right. So there you go. This case was suggested by Brittany, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you have, and if you have any more, please do let me know. Joji Obara was not always born as Joji Obara. He was initially born as Kim Sung-jong, and that was on the 10th of August in 1952. He was born to quite a poor Korean family in Osaka in Japan. He also had twin brothers too. His dad was a scrap collector when he was young, but he had these really big dreams, and they actually did pay off because he ended up owning a string of properties in Osaka and Tokyo, along with what were known as gamer caves. I think they're like arcades, but I'm not entirely sure. Eventually, all of these would make him and his family very wealthy. So the family went pretty quickly from poverty to wealth, and they just ended up doing really well for themselves. And then Joji went to private schools in Tokyo. He ended up with some private tutoring every day as well. When he was 15, he got into a prep school that pretty much would guarantee him a place in Keiko University. By the age of 17 though, unfortunately, his father did pass away. Obviously that would leave his wealth to his family, so Joji, along with his twin brothers. Joji decided to travel around the world. He was very interested in the Western world, and so off he went. He went traveling for a bit. Then he graduated from university with degrees in politics and law, and then he became a Japanese citizen fully, and that is when he decided that he was going to legally change his name. He changed it 2 times because he did not want people to know about his Korean heritage. The first name that he picked was Saisho Hoshima, probably not said that right, and then after that he then became known as Joji Obara. After he had graduated, again, you know, he had a lot of money, so he decided that he was going to invest that in real estate, which he did, and it worked out so well for him. He ended up with properties worth up to $38 million in total, which is amazing. He did so well for himself, but then unfortunately the 90s recession hit and it just screwed everything up. It screwed so many people's lives up, and Joji was one of those. He lost pretty much everything. He lost the company, he lost all the assets, all the properties, well, not all of them, but a lot of the properties, and he had creditors on his back because he had lost everything and they wanted paying back, and it was just a nightmare. He then apparently took one of his businesses that he still had left and decided that he was going to use it as a money laundering front for the Yakuza Sumiyoshi Kai, which is like a syndicate of the Yakuza or something like that. So that is what he did with his business from then on, to try and claw a bit of money back. So Joji seemed like, you know, just an ordinary normal guy. His friends said that he did, you know, recreational things, but you know, apart from that, he was just a normal guy. Or so they thought. They did say though that he did wear shoe lifts, and he also took growth hormones to try and basically make himself taller. I think he was 5'6", and as I said before, he liked to travel, and he got a massive interest from that in Western women, and so it's believed that he probably did that so that he was more attractive to Western women. He had a fascination with them, and let me tell you, it was not a good fascination. He had a dark secret, and he was trying to hide it from the world. When he got back from his travels, he would often visit hostess bars, and that was a place where there would be a lot of women, you know, a lot of Japanese women as well, but also a lot of foreign women too. And he would become obsessed with women from that. Again, it was mainly Western women, but you know, it would be Japanese women too, but more so white women because he viewed them as a status symbol. Quite common in Asian nations are hostess bars, in the sense that it describes a modern form of a geisha entertainer. It's like we're young women who work at bars and they're paid to have conversations with men, you know, go over, light the cigarettes, have a sing-song with them, maybe have a dance with them, but it's a strict policy about no touching. So it's not anything like that. The males cannot touch the women at all or make any sexual advances on them. And it's a thing where like popular hostesses would often receive drinks from the people who favor them. They would get gifts, they would get social sort of invites to different places, like men would offer to go on a date with them and pay for everything, just things like that. And Western women are highly sought after in these hostess bars and they can command quite high fees from it too. So Joji would often go to them and he would be satisfied with looking at these women, but eventually this wasn't enough and he felt like he had to have some of them. So in February of 1992, Joji did just that. Let me just say it wasn't the beginning of his crimes by any means, but this was his first murder, not that anybody knew it at the time. So we will get more into all of the crimes that he committed, which there are a lot, let me just say. But, you know, they didn't find out about them. Well, they didn't even find out about this one until years later. You'll see as we get through it. But this was his first murder. A lot of people as well believe that this first victim is quite forgotten in this case because he goes on to kill another woman, and she gets national attention, and his first victim wasn't even known to be a victim. So a lot of people call her the forgotten victim because the next one had such a huge profile case and she never did. Her name was Karita Ridgeway, and she was born on the 3rd of March in 1970. She was an Australian former model from Claremont, Perth in Australia. After pursuing an education in Sydney, Karita eventually settled in the beachside suburb of Clovelly. And by the age of 21, like I said, she was a former model. Well, I guess you could still class her as a model. She tried her hand at modelling, but decided that she actually wanted to do acting instead. The problem with that was, though, is that acting classes were very expensive. And like most places around that time, Australia was one of the countries that were going through a major recession. Karita was engaged to a man called Robert Fisher, and he was studying law at New South Wales University. Karita also had an older sister called Samantha, and Samantha had a boyfriend in Japan. Now, she had already decided that she was going to go down to Japan, she was going to spend some time with her boyfriend and live there for a little while. And as a job, she went down there, she began teaching English and just generally spending time with her boyfriend Hideki. And then, obviously, Karita, who needed money and wanted to do acting classes, decided that because her sister was down there doing really well, she was earning quite a lot of money from teaching English, she decided that she was going to do the same thing. She was going to go down to Japan, she was going to join her sister, and she was going to get a teaching job and then earn some money for a few months, and then she would be able to come back, afford her acting classes. She felt like it was the right thing to do because, you know, there's a lot of holiday economy down there and tourist economy, and a lot of places pay pretty well for stuff like that. Yes, okay, she would have to leave Robert for a while and not be with her fiance, but at the end of it, she would have her dreams paid for, her acting classes paid for, and not only that, she was going to pay for his student fees too. She set off in December of 1991, and she met up with Samantha, who was in a house share called a gajin. They shared it with a few other people, but it's especially for foreigners, I believe, and it's a place where you pay on a monthly basis. So if you're only going to stay there for a couple of months, you know, you're not stuck in a contract of rent for a long time, you pay month on month, and that was perfect for Karita because she was only planning on staying there a couple of months. Samantha was really excited to show her sister around. You know, she'd been living in Japan for a little while now, and she was just so excited to share it with her and for her to see the sights. The thing with Karita, though, is unfortunately she wasn't able to get a job teaching English like her sister. She knew that she needed to start making money as soon as possible, and this is when she replied to an advert in an English language newspaper. It was called the Japan Times, and this advert was seeking hostesses to work in a club called Ayakoji, which of course is a hostess bar. So she got that job. She, you know, started earning a decent amount of money from it. But unfortunately, she would only work there less than a month before disaster struck. And that would come on the 14th of February in 1992. So she was working her shift at the hostess bar when one of the customers asked a few of the other girls, including Karita, to accompany him to a barbecue. Now, this was often a thing that happened a lot in these hostess bars. You know, they would earn a lot of extra money from such things, and so they all agreed to go. Karita probably felt really safe as well because there was a lot of other hostesses going. It wasn't just her. So she decided that she was going to go. This was called, it was known as a dohan. And it's again where clients would offer to take the girls out and do things with them. You know, it was supposed to be obviously in a non-sexual way because that wasn't what a hostess was. You know, it was just company, essentially. It all went really well when the girls got there, and Karita decided that she was going to leave with one of the men that were there. I don't know the ins and outs of it. These men are supposed to make sure that these hostesses get back to their place of work safely. So whether he offered her that or something like that, offered her a ride to get back to where she worked, I do not know the ins and outs of it, but she did leave with this man. And Karita was just a lovely, sweet girl. She was very sweet-natured. She always wanted to see the best in people and saw the good in them. And she probably just believed that this man was harmless. But unfortunately, that was not the case. He got her in his apartment. Again, I don't know whether he was taking her back to work or whether he said he'd stay at his house for a while and then go back to work. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but he manages to get her in his apartment, and that is where he drugs her. I'm not sure whether initially it was with chloroform, but she was chloroformed. So whether he drugged her with something first of all and then chloroformed her later, because that is what he did. You'll see later on, but that's what the method that he used. I don't know whether that is what he did to Karita or not. Whether he drugged her with something else and then chloroformed her or chloroformed her first, I'm not entirely sure. Either way, she was chloroformed eventually, and he waited for her to wake up, and she just didn't. She was unconscious for hours and hours, and he panicked. He ended up taking her to the hospital. So the next day, Samantha gets home. She's actually been spending some time with her boyfriend, and so she wasn't there for a few days, but she gets home and she sees that Karita is nowhere to be seen. She then gets a strange message from one of the other housemates that lives there. She said that some guy rang the house and told her that Karita had actually gone away with some friends, and then he hung up. And that was it. That was everything. Samantha was obviously worried about that. Like, why would this random man ring her up and tell her that her sister's gone away with some friends? It didn't make any sense. She was really worried. She'd not heard anything off her sister, you know, and she was panicking. But then as the day passes by, she ends up getting a phone call from the staff at Hideshima Hospital. That was where she found out that her sister was actually in hospital and she was suffering from food poisoning. And I've done the air quotes because it was not food poisoning. Obviously, she got there as quick as she could. She goes to her sister's bedside, who is in a really bad way. She was drifting in and out of consciousness, like a lot. And obviously, Samantha's trying to find out what had happened, but she wasn't ever conscious long enough to actually respond and tell her what had happened. The thing here was the story about the food poisoning wasn't really matching up with what was actually happening to her. So Samantha was told that a Japanese man had actually brought in Karita into the hospital. He had said that she had eaten some bad shellfish and was suffering from food poisoning from that. He introduced himself as Akira Nishida, and then he just left. And everyone found it was strange because even the doctors the symptoms that she had did not match up to food poisoning, and it didn't really match up to what this man was saying. They actually diagnosed hepatitis, and it was an infection in her liver, and they didn't know how she had actually gotten that, but knew that it wasn't connected with food poisoning. Poor Karita ended up just getting worse and worse and ended up on a life support machine. This is when she was then transferred to Tokyo's Women University Hospital to receive a more higher sort of advanced care that hospital couldn't provide her with. During all of this time, Samantha was receiving phone calls from Akira, which was obviously the man that had left her sister there. He just kept repeating that she'd fallen ill with food poisoning at the beach resort of Kamakura. He had done everything he could for Karita, even calling his own private doctor for her. Really trying hard to convince Samantha that this was what happened, and Samantha didn't really believe it. She also repeatedly asked for him to leave his phone number, which he refused to do, and so that just sort of amped her suspicions up even more. Unfortunately, despite the specialised care that she was now receiving, Karita did not get any better. She, in fact, ended up getting worse. She ended up suffering multi-organ failure, And then as a result of all of that, ended up being pronounced as brain dead. So the life support machines were the only thing that was keeping her body going. She had no brain activity. Essentially, she was gone at that point. With a family by her side, they decided that they were going to turn off the machines, and it didn't take long for Karita to pass away. It was only a few days before what would have been her 22nd birthday, and she had spent less than 2 weeks in hospital fighting, you know, and it just, unfortunately, her body just could not handle all of the damage that it had suffered. She was then cremated 2 days later. So Karita had lost her life. A man had brought her in to the hospital saying that she had suffered food poisoning, which didn't match up with anything. It didn't match up with what the doctors were finding. You know, nobody really believed it. And despite all of that, despite all of the suspicion, all of the strange circumstances, guess what they did not do? Well, they didn't do an autopsy because, you know, they said that she died to natural causes. Don't know. That's what they said. She did not die to natural causes, but, you know, they did find that out later. Just really unfortunate that they didn't actually do an autopsy, because if they had have done that, they would have found out some crucial, like, information that points elsewhere. Karita's family didn't believe that she had died to natural causes, especially with this man ringing up all the time saying that, you know, she was food poisoned. Trust me, it was food poisoning. And then none of it ever matched. It was all just very strange. Samantha literally begged the police to look into it, but they just didn't. And it is highly believed and speculated that the reasoning behind this is because Karita was a hostess. I don't know. I'm guessing they don't think highly of that kind of job. I don't know. But that's the main reason as to the belief as to why the police did not even bother looking into it. They just kind of felt like her case wasn't important enough, which is so annoying and frustrating. This poor girl lost her life at such a young age, and she just wasn't important enough to look into, which is just ridiculous. Everyone's life matters, no matter their job, no matter what they do. Everyone's life matters, and everything should be looked into just because of the job that they had. It wasn't even, she wanted to do acting. She literally took on that job for a few months. It wasn't like it was a permanent job. Even if it was, it doesn't matter. She deserved to have everything looked into. And they didn't, and as you can tell, it just really frustrated me. Annette Foster, Karita's mother, would say years later that the police, not only did they ignore her concerns and suspicions, they laughed at her as well. So it's just really wrong what they did. But what else could a family do? The police were not willing to take it any further, and so they just had to accept that their daughter had died due to natural causes, and they had to go home. They had to go back to Australia. They had to try and carry on with their lives as best as they could, even though they were returning, missing Karita with the biggest hole in their heart that could never ever be filled. But they just had to do it. Before they actually went home though, the family would gain a meeting with Akita. He met them at an airport hotel. He was dressed in nice, fine, swanky clothes, and he appeared visibly nervous and was sweating buckets. He again repeated to the family that Karita had become ill after eating bad oysters. What he did then, he took out a diamond necklace with a matching ring, and he asked if they would take it because he was planning on giving it to Karita for her 22nd birthday, and he wanted them to accept it instead because he was going to give it to their daughter, but unfortunately she lost her life. And then he's going on about how much he loved her, so he wanted them to have it instead. He also offered the family like a condolence payment of 50 million yen, which now I converted it. It actually converts to around over $438,000. So yeah, a lot of money. Obviously this is 90s, so inflation and all that lot, but yeah, it was a lot of money either way. Apparently these payments in Japan are a common thing, you know, condolence payments. People do it all of the time. But with this one, there was a slight catch. The family had to sign a document that said that Karita actually died due to not being treated properly by the hospital staff. Now, I have no idea as to whether the family actually took this money. I do know that Samantha thought that it was a bribe, but whether they did take it or not, I do not know. But then they went back to Oz with their daughter's ashes and tried to carry on with their lives as best as they could. Then we skip forward a bunch of years, 8 years to be exact. Another woman, a hostess, vanishes from a Tokyo bar. Lucy Blackman, she was born on the 1st of September in 1978 and was from Kent in England. Again, she was young, only 20 years old, when on the 4th of May in 2000, she and her friend Louise Phillips arrived in Japan on a 90-day tourist visa. The pair actually used to be flight attendants for British Airways, and then they decided that they actually wanted to travel themselves around Asia, and so they went for it. When they arrived, Lucy and Louise checked into a first-floor lodging house near the Olympic Stadium of Tokyo, and they both ended up getting a job as a hostess in the Casablanca bar. They worked there for just under 2 months, when on the 1st of July, Lucy was invited to go on a dohan, like another paid date kind of thing that we discussed earlier. She rings up Louise to say that, let her know what she's doing, that she's spending the evening with a customer. And again, it was a normal thing to do for hostesses, so they'd probably done it before. Everything's always been fine. If she was going to do it again, it would earn her a bit more money, and why not? Then Lucy does not return home. In a similar manner to Karita's case, a strange man rings up Louise. He calls himself Akira Takagi, and he states that Lucy has joined a cult and that she's just not coming back. You know, a cult. Seriously, she's joined a cult. I mean, okay then. Obviously, Louise was thinking, what on earth is going on? She was frightened by this because, I mean, she knew that she wouldn't join a cult. Come on. But she was missing still, and so she decided to ring Lucy's family back in England and let them know that she was missing, and there's a strange man claiming she's joined a cult and she just doesn't know what's going on, basically. Lucy's parents, of course, reported their daughter missing to the Tokyo police, and again, they were met with disdain. Officers pretty much shrugged their shoulders and said that she's probably ran off with a boyfriend, even though, you know, she didn't actually have a boyfriend. She wasn't seeing anyone, she didn't have a boyfriend, you know, but she's definitely ran off with a boyfriend. Okay. Lucy's younger sister Sophie ends up flying out to Japan because she wants to look for her sister. She searches around for a while, and then a week later she is joined by their father Tim. When he gets there, he holds a press conference which was featured across the Japanese news, and he spoke about his missing daughter. Now, funnily enough, the G8 summit was actually being held in Tokyo that year, and Tim was, as a result of that, was able to meet with the British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, and even the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Both then publicly appealed for information on Lucy's disappearance, and Tony Blair was personally interviewed with his Japanese counterpart. You know, the police, surprisingly, launched a high-profile investigation into Lucy's disappearance, which is just an absolute joke. They weren't interested before, but now all these high-up powers are on the news asking for information. You know, they really didn't have a choice. So yeah, that's why they did it, which is, again, very frustrating. I mean, it's good because obviously the case was then being looked into, but just the circumstances as to how it got to being looked into is just an absolute joke. So Lucy Blackman's case was huge. This is why Karita is often thought of as the forgotten victim, because Lucy was the one that got all of the media attention. She got a massive high-profile case out of it. But I mean, you can see why, because just the circumstances surrounding it are so frustrating, but that is how it happened, and that is how it went down. There was something like 30,000 missing persons posters spread out across Japan. She was all over the news, and you know, it was just huge. It was just absolutely huge, the search for her. On the 1st of August, police get a letter from someone pretending to be Lucy saying that I'm doing what I want, just leave me alone, pretty much. And they thought that it was fake straight away. Nobody really believed that that was off Lucy. They followed up on tons of tips, tons of leads, possible sightings. They all led nowhere. Spent a lot of money in the time that he was in Japan trying to find his daughter, and so he just had to go back. You know, there's sometimes you just can't do anything about it. So he goes back, and then in October is when the police finally begin looking into Joji Obara, who was then 48 at the time. So the reason that they began looking into him is that several Japanese women had come forward to say that this wealthy businessman, Joji Obara, should be a person of interest. Many of them had woken up in his house in the morning with no memory of the night before whatsoever. Now, some of these women had already reported Joji to the Tokyo police, but again, you know, a lot of these women were hostesses. the police didn't care. I'm just going to put it out there. They just didn't care at this point. That's what it seems like. And they never investigated the matter. Surprise, surprise. So they finally questioned Joji, who admits that he did see Lucy and that he did know of her, but he had nothing to do with her disappearance whatsoever. Eventually, all his lies and all his pretenses began to unravel. Several months after Lucy went missing, we're now on the 9th of February in 2001, her remains were found. She had been dismembered, buried in a shallow grave in a cave under a bathtub, and it was his summer home. And, you know, it wasn't far from that. So yeah, they arrested him on suspicion of murder. Her body had been dismembered and put in separate bags, but when they found it, unfortunately, the decomposition was too bad so that they could not find her cause of death. And it's something that they would never find. The police dug deeper. They managed to find phone records that tied Joji to Lucy. They ended up searching a few of his properties. One of them, they hit the jackpot, and the full extent of his crimes began to be revealed. They found more than 400 videos of Joji sexually assaulting all these different women. Japanese, Western, there was just so many of them. They believed that it's between 150 to 400 women that he actually sexually assaulted. And they found diaries and things, and in one of the sections in his diaries, he wrote that he had planned to have sex with 500 women before he was 50. And another entry said that he felt like he could only have sex with women when they were unconscious. At least he did not get to have his goal that he wanted. Not saying that any of this case is good, but I was quite thankful that, you know, he didn't meet his aspiration in life. What an aspiration. So what he would do is he would offer them a glass of rare wine, you know, expensive wine. He would treat these girls really well, or so they thought, and he would lace this wine with drugs. He would then sexually assault them, and this is where the chloroform comes in, because if they stirred at any point, he would chloroform them until they lost consciousness. The following day, when his victims were awake and in pain and had no memory of what had happened the night before, he would just tell them that they had gotten really drunk and then passed out, and that was that. I mean, they knew something was off, they knew something wasn't right, and that's probably what he did to them. But again, some of them reported it to the police, who did nothing. Others would have been embarrassed and not wanted to tell anyone, and others probably might not have even known that he did something to them and possibly believed him. As they look into these videos of these women, they find one video in particular, and it was a video of Karita Ridgeway. As they dug even deeper, they also found a receipt around the hospital that Karita was taken on the same day that she was taken in. So this unknown man that had dropped her off, well, he wasn't as unknown as he was right then, because guess what, it was Joji Obara. Not only that, again, I've said that they found diaries and things. They found one diary in particular which had all of the women's names in and exactly what he had done to them, and one entry read, "Karita Ridgeway, too much chloroform." So basically probably gonna do his normal MO, but he accidentally gave her too much chloroform and ended up killing her. I do not know whether she was his first sexual assault victim and that he was testing the waters as to see what worked, and that is how he overdosed her. I don't know. I'm not sure when he actually started assaulting women. So she could very well have been his very first one, and he just didn't know how much to give a person to not cause them to die. I don't know. I'm not sure on that. But at the same time, she might not have been his first victim, and it might have just been sort of him still testing it and accidentally overdosed her. I don't know, but I don't think he intended to kill her. I think he intended to let her go, like with all the other women, but unfortunately, you know, she got too much chloroform and ended up in organ failure as a result. I do believe that he intended to kill Lucy because she was dismembered and he hid her body. But Karita, he actually took to the hospital and tried to get her some help. So I don't know why there was a difference, whether at that point it was just escalation after so many years, I don't know. So now they were looking into Karita's death as, guess what? Maybe it actually wasn't natural causes like they thought for all of these, I don't know, 8 years, was it? Something like that. So they go back to the hospital, and amazingly enough, even though she never had an autopsy, they never looked into any of that. They still had a section of her liver, which they tested, and guess what? It showed toxic levels of chloroform in it. So if they literally just looked into it a little bit, because there was suspicions, they didn't think that what this man was saying was true. If they would have just looked into it, they would have found that chloroform in the system, and they would have known that she did not die to natural causes. But they didn't. They didn't look into it. In 2001, Karita's parents flew back to Japan, where they identified Joji Obara as the man that they had spoken to before they left at that hotel where he gave them the jewelry and said that he loved their daughter. He was the same man. In 2002, Joji appeared in court to face charges of the abduction, rape, and murder of Lucy Blackman, the rape of an additional 8 anonymous women, and the rape and manslaughter of Karita Ridgeway. His trial would take a long 7 years, which apparently is quite common in Japan. You know, I know that trials can take a long time sometimes, but normally it's not that long. But in Japan, apparently it's common. Finally, though, in 2007, Joji Obara was found guilty of the manslaughter of Karita Ridgeway. Shockingly, though, he was found not guilty of the murder of Lucy Blackman. But it was pretty much because her body was that far decomposed that they couldn't find a cause of death. But for the manslaughter of Karita, the rape of 8 unnamed women, and the unlawful disposal of Lucy's body, Joji Obara was jailed for life. Joji has always maintained his innocence, and to date has actually given no reasons for his crime. Some people do believe that it's pretty much given away in the diary that he said that he couldn't sleep with women who were conscious, and that he wanted to sleep with 500 women before he was 50. So yeah, maybe that's the only motive he needed. Tim Blackman accepted condolence money of £458,000 from a friend of Joji Obara's, and he used some of that money to set up like a foundation in Lucy Blackman's name. In early December of 2010, the Supreme Court rejected Joji Obara's appeal and decided to uphold his life sentence. This case was really frustrating. I found the lack of just the police wanting to look into any of it just did my head in, and that was until Tim got involved seemingly with the Prime Minister and all that lot, and then, you know, they started looking into it. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad they looked into it, and that's not what I'm saying here. I'm just saying that they should have looked into it in the first place. That's all I'm trying to say. But yeah, 2 young women lost their lives, many more were assaulted, and, you know, their lives were tainted by this man as well, and it's just so heartbreaking. This case is quite shocking, I found. But yeah, that is the end of the case. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Joji Obara. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.